Hey everyone, how are we doing today? This is James Sweeney, aka Split Suit, and welcome back to another video. In this video, we are going to talk all about pre-flop planning. And pre-flop planning is a very important skill, in my opinion. It's not the most basic thing in the world, nor should it be where you focus your starting energy if you're a beginning player, but it can really start helping you break into intermediate to advanced play. Just being able to think that step ahead and really reconsider lines based upon what you expect. So this video is going to be pretty jam-packed, again talking all about pre-flop planning, mostly the kind of stuff that I think about, kind of the mental checklist that I build, which hopefully will be helpful for you, or at the bare minimum would hopefully help you build your own. So if we're just doing a quick table of contents, we're going to first start by defining and talking about some basics of pre-flop planning. And then we're going to go through the three major spots that happen pre-flop where planning is the most useful in my opinion. So open raising, cold calling, and then 3-betting. And I know we've talked a little bit about 3-betting in the past as far as re-stealing is concerned, but I did want to talk a little bit more about it in this video, talk about the mindset that I use, again, the mental checklist, and again, hopefully it'll help you build yours, or you can use the same one if it works for you. So without further ado, just crank right into it, start talking about some basics, some general theory, and go from there. So let's get started. So when I'm talking about pre-flop planning, what I'm really thinking about is what are the logical reactions going to be if I make a certain play? It's literally that simple. And then starting to think about, okay, how does that relate to the math? How does that relate to the money? And where is my money coming from, if it's coming at all? And staying away from situations that are going to be negative EV. So if I have a junky hand for middle position, and thinking about opening it and think that if I open it I'm going to get 3-balled a ton and I'm just planning on raise folding pre-flop, where's my motivation to go for that open? It wouldn't take very much to run a very simple EV equation and realize that that's going to be a pretty losing endeavor if I'm getting 3-bet that often. So these are the things we want to be thinking about, thinking that step ahead and really thinking about, okay, what's good, what's bad, how does that relate to the math? And then just looking ahead as far as who's behind you and thinking about how their frequencies are going to relate to that EV equation. Again, if you're going to get 3-balled a ton and you're planning on a raise folding, is it really that good? Certainly might not be. Same thing where if I'm opening a junky hand and I expect to get flatted a lot, or if I'm thinking about 3-betting but I think that 3-bet's going to get called a lot. So it's important that we can think that step ahead because it can really help us create lines on and off the table and just generally look at strategy from a more mathematical point of view. We don't just want to jump in there and start pushing buttons for the heck of pushing buttons. We want to have a clear, concise reason for it, and using pre-flop planning, and again, relating that all to the math and thus the EVs, can really make our life easier, and of course our main goal is to make it more profitable as well. So let's go through a hand and I'll kind of walk you through what I'm thinking about in this situation. So take a hand where we have 4s in early position. We're deciding what we want to do. Well, 4s at full ring usually are not on my default open range from early position, but that doesn't mean that I always want to stick to my very rigid quote-unquote hand chart. I always have a mental idea of my default ranges, but a default range is useful when you don't have any other information. The second that I have information, I want to use that information. So if I'm sitting here with 4s, the first thing that I'm asking myself is, do I want to open? Because at this point I only have really 3 options. I can limp it, I can raise it, or I can fold it. Well, I'm pretty much never going to open limp in an online table. Live will do it a lot more, but that's because the game plays a lot differently. And I'm not going to say I've never limped this online. I surely have. And I've even done so occasionally in modern games. But it's just a very, very rare thing that I do it. So most of the time, when it comes to an open situation, our thought process online especially is going to be we either raise it or we fold it. So because I know that folding is my neutral EV play, if any other line is going to be profitable, I'm going to do that. So if raising is profitable, awesome. If it's not and I don't think I can limp it, then I fold it. It's literally that simple. This is why, if you legit break it down, you only have 3 decisions at any given time, possibly 2. And if you just realistically say, okay, what do I expect to happen if I do X action, then you can start putting some math behind it and start saying this is going to be good or this is going to be really awful. So in this situation, what I'm asking myself is, if I raise, do I expect to get 3-bet a lot? If I expect to get 3-bet a lot, am I going to be folding it a lot if I do? If that's the case, you obviously know that your raise folding. If you expect the 3-bets coming too often, could easily be a situation where you don't want to go for the raise. Next, I would start thinking a little bit about, do I expect to get flatted a lot? Do I expect to get flatted in heads-up pots or multi-way pots? And each way, how does my hand perform? And then I start saying, okay, if I'm going to have to see flops, now I need to start thinking about how am I hitting and how am I missing. And that's very easy. We can pull out Flopzilla and run 4s and see how it hits flops. And we know that it's going to hit the flop, give or take, around 12, and just to round it to 12, say 12% of the time we're going to catch a set or better. The other 88% of the time we are going to miss our sets. So I know that when I catch my set, life is really easy, hardly ever have any difficult decisions. Awesome. So I'm not going to worry about that. So what I start asking myself is, okay, if I'm going to have to see flops, can I make money that 88% of the time that I'm missing? That's what I care about. And that money could be made by getting my opponent to fold to a c-bet. That could be made by getting my opponent to fold to a double barrel. Could be check raising. Could be whatever. So what I'm asking myself is, can I make money when I miss as well? If I can't, is raising to make money 12% of the time and lose 88% of the time, is that going to be that profitable? It's up for debate. You could convince me one way or the other. But again, these are the ways you want to be thinking ahead. So this is what you need to be thinking about. And again, is this situation going to be profitable for your hand? Is it not going to be profitable? Is it going to be profitable for your skill set? Are you not strong enough to know when to bluff c-bet? And that's not an insult. If you're not, if you don't really feel comfortable, you don't really know when to go for bluff c-bets or bluff dubs or whatever it be, maybe it's a situation you just avoid because you're not going to be able to make money enough for that time that you don't catch your set. And also thinking about multi-way pots. You know, if you expect a multi-way pot, you know you're probably not going to win very often the 88% of the time you miss. You're not going to feel very comfortable throwing out a bluff c-bet in a multi-way pot. Now, you can make more money the times you hit, which you have going for you, which is excellent. But again, these are the questions you have to be asking yourself. A lot of the times my answer is simply going to come down to, no, I don't think it's profitable enough to open and thus fold and not really feel that bad about it. But these are the questions that I need to be asking myself before I do one action or the other. And this is, you notice I'm thinking ahead. I'm saying, okay, if I take an action, say raise, what do I expect to happen? How do I expect to make money, if at all? And if it's not a plus EV endeavor, probably just going on another action, which most likely preflop is going to be folding or getting rid of the hand pretty early. And we can do the same kind of thought process when we're talking about isolating. If we take a situation like this where there's a limp from under the gun +1, well, our default here would be to ISO. We have a hand that crushes his range, we have position on him, we think we're probably going to be able to make money both pre and post against that dude. So as a default, my default here would simply be to ISO, probably up to 4.5 big blinds, and go from there. But as a preflop thinker, as a preflop planner, I need to be thinking a step ahead. If I go for the raise here, what do I expect the people behind me to do? Do I expect to face 3-bets? If I do, is that something that I want to handle? Can I face that well? Blah, blah, blah. Do I expect to get a lot of flat calls? If so, am I going to be able to play poker very well post-flop, out of position with a tough hand to play? So these are the questions I'm asking myself. And let's say there's a couple of fish behind you. Do you want this kind of situation to happen where you ISO, get multiple callers, and you have to go to a flop? Because you know if there's fish behind you, they're going to call you a lot of the time. And you have to be thinking about that. Is that going to be positive or not? And you know that if one of those guys call you, the under the gun +1 is going to call you as well. And now you're in a very multi-way pot, usually monkey in the middle or slightly out of position. And you know, how often are you hitting flops? Are you going to feel comfortable on an Ace XX or a Jack XX board? Obviously, you're missing 2/3 of the time, and just raising preflop to catch 2 pairs is ridiculous. That's not even a thought process, really. So these are the things you want to be thinking about before you just start mindlessly going for ISOs or opens or whatever. Is think that step ahead. Do you have a bunch of tight players behind you in this situation? Then yeah, probably just going to ISO and go for that. If I expect to get called a lot, well, I need to think about, can I make money when I miss? Do I expect to be able to make money when I hit? And is it going to be really easy money, tough money? what position am I going to end up being in if I end up seeing a flop? Is that good, is that bad? And then making decisions from there. So again, starting to build that mental checklist of the things we want to be looking for before we start taking really any action and putting some math behind it and saying, okay, this is going to be good or bad. And again, making decisions based upon what you think is the most plus EV play possible. Now, from early and middle position, we tend to be a little bit more static in our ranges, just simply because there's more people to contend with. We don't really want to be out of position a ton of the time, and early and middle position, you can usually get away with being relatively static. But the second that I start to get into late position, I tend to get very, very dynamic and take plays that I think are really good, or just ignore them if I don't think they're good. So let's take a situation where it folds to us with Queen 8 in the cutoff. So my general mental checklist right here is simply going to be, do I think I can raise and steal this or not? So if I think that everyone behind me is going to fold, then I'll just steal. In which case it doesn't really matter if I have Queen 8 or 9 deuce off, it's all kind of the same hand. You're just kind of thinking that people are going to fold enough of the time, turn it into a steal, and just try to pick up the pot. Easy. So that's the first and easy one. Now, if I think that I'm going to get called, well, that's something I have to think about. Do I think I'm going to get 3-bet? If I'm going to get 3-bet, am I planning on 4-betting, or am I just planning on raise folding? This is one of the biggest issues that I see a lot of people do, is they will steal mindlessly into really aggressive restealers. And then they get really aggravated when they keep getting 3-bet, and for some odd reason they act surprised about it. And you need to be thinking a step ahead before you even push the raise button. If you expect an action to happen a ton of the time, you better know how it's going to be profitable for you. And if it's not going to be profitable for you, choose a different line. So in this situation, if I thought I was going to get 3-balled a ton, okay, I'm probably not very likely to go for the steal unless I'm planning on messing around. Or am I going to get flat called? If I'm going to get flat called, okay, is my opponent going to fight me a lot post flop, or is he going to play really fit or fold? Because if he's likely to play fit or fold, then I'm probably a little bit more likely to steal with intentions of just c-betting pretty much every flop, expecting to pick up a large chunk of the time. So you see, say he's cold calling me 20% of the time pre-flop, well, that's obviously a decently high percentage, but of the times that he calls me, I'm going to be able to pick it up probably about 70% post-flop. So obviously it doesn't take much to see that that's a really plus EV situation for me, and thus something I would want to take advantage of. So again, you see the mental checklist I'm building. I'm going through all my logical options pre-flop. And again, I don't really consider open limping hardly ever unless it's a very, very special situation, in which case I will consider it. But most of the time pre-flop, in open situations, it's either I open it because it's plus EV, or I fold it because it's not plus EV. Legit that simple, and that's the great thing about pre-flop planning, is it's as simple as you want to make it. Or you can make it as complex as you want to, but I prefer to leave things pretty simple. Think about how often am I going to get folds pre-flop, and if I expect to see a lot of flops, am I going to be able to pick it up with bluffs? Am I going to be able to pick it up with easy c-bets? Am I going to have to fight really hard? Do I have to hit hands? Blah, blah, blah. So again, start to see the mental checklist I'm building, and hopefully this is starting to make some sense and sink in a little bit. Now, I know we've talked about this kind of hand before, but I still think it's important to talk about. So, a set mine situation where we're thinking about going for a set mine. So, again, my normal thought process here is, can I flat call? Yes or no? If I expect a flat call, am I doing so because it's a really good implied odd situation? Am I flat calling because I think I need to mess around a little bit post-flop to make a little bit of extra profit? Am I calling because there are people behind me that are going to allow this to be a good call? And by the same token of looking behind us, if I call here and expect to get 3-bet a ton, is that going to be a good thing for me? So again, thinking that step ahead, thinking not only about flops, but also thinking about what could logically happen pre-flop. And this isn't to say that if you think this is a good set mine, you call here and you end up getting 3-bet, that you necessarily messed up. Because there's always going to be a non-zero percentage of 3-betting behind you. Always. So maybe you thought your opponent was going to, 3-bet maybe 1% of the time, and he happens to have it this one time. That doesn't necessarily mean you messed up. It's more you messed up when you expected it to be coming 30% of the time, or in the 50 ballpark, something like that. If you expect it to be coming a ton of the time and you're still making that flat call pre, then we could start having some issues. But if it's just the rare one, I really wouldn't worry about it too much. So again, thinking the step ahead, so let's say in this situation we think there's some fish behind us, so it makes this a pretty good set mine, so we go for that. And, post flop is still post flop. You took a situation you thought was good. Post flop, you just make your decisions, classify your hand as value right here, and probably going to go for a raise as a default and just try to get stacks inside as soon as possible, thinking that he'll allow me if he's going to be donking into multiple people on this kind of flop. So again, little things we want to be thinking about pre-flop, just general EVs, thinking about, is the set mine good or bad? If I decide to flat, do I expect to get 3-balled a lot behind me? Is that going to be good or bad? And also, if you're going to be calling pre, can you take it away later? If you expect a heads-up pot, do you expect to be able to possibly bluff? That can be a great thing. That can all of a sudden turn maybe a break-even to slightly losing set mine into something that could be pretty profitable and pretty nice for us. So again, just some extra things you want to be thinking about. So I want to talk about two hands real quick that are similar, but not quite. So take a spot like this where there's a raise from under the gun +1, we have fives, we're debating whether or not we want to set mine, because we know that that's how fives tend to play pre-flop. And we're thinking ahead, we're looking behind us, thinking about who's there, thinking about are we going to get 3-bet a lot, and we decide that we think we are going to get 3-bet a fairly large chunk of the time. And we just don't think fives are going to perform that well against that kind of situation, so we just say forget it, see that 3-bet because we knew it was coming, and ended up dodging a pretty nice bullet. Cool. Take a situation like this. Exact same situation, we think there's an aggressive 3-better behind us who's going to squeeze a massive amount of the time. Why not flat here occasionally and try to induce it? I see way too many people say, oh, there's this aggressive squeezer behind me, and just stick to the default of 3-betting aces or kings or whatever they do. And I'm not saying that's necessarily bad. I mean, obviously 3-betting aces there pre-flop is standard, it's profitable, it's whatever. I'm not going to say much about it. But if it's a situation where you can induce a squeeze and get someone to put in 14.5 or 15 or even 13 big blinds pre-flop with a massively wide range that you can crush however you want, that can be a really profitable endeavor. So I'm always looking for little situations like this where I can go for back raises with aces and kings and really punish the kind of players that are mindlessly squeezing every single situation that comes up, and that can be a really nice profitable spot for me. Now when I get the call from under the gun +1, under the gun +1's effectively telegraphed his range at like jacks plus ace king sometimes, so I'll usually just go for the back raise here, try to get it in pre-flop and expect to win a very large chunk of the time. But again, this play isn't made really possible if you just go for the mindless 3-bet. So the whole thing is just think the step ahead. If you expect something to happen and you expect it to happen a large percentage of the time, abuse it. And again, this isn't to say that if you necessarily call pre-flop and it doesn't get squeezed this time, which again, it's never going to get squeezed 100% of the time, it doesn't necessarily mean you messed up. Assuming that you thought it was going to get squeezed a ton and you called because of that, it's going to whiff sometimes, and that's okay, but make sure you're thinking about that. Be prepared for that kind of situation. Just like, say I thought it was a decent chance that this situation would get squeezed, but that MP2 is a mega fish who's going to call a lot, and then all of a sudden nobody behind him really wants to squeeze very much. Well, what's the point of flatting to induce like a 50-way pot with aces? So you see how thinking the step ahead can really clarify the situation, really show you where the money is coming from, and allow you to win nice big pots occasionally by abusing players that are able to be abused like that. Another thing that I think about pre-flop when I'm considering the cold call is excess ways that I can make money. So if someone is going to play too predictably post-flop, then I'll probably consider cold calling a fair chunk of the time pre-flop because I know how I can make money post. In fact, one of my favorite plays used to be to call every single open raise from EP on the button with anything that's even slightly suited or connected and stab every flop that they checked because they were check folding a ton of the time from that spot. That was a really, really profitable endeavor and something that I was abusing a lot of. And I still look for those kind of plays where I can use my position, where I can abuse someone who plays too predictably post-flop. And most of the time they're going to adjust, but they're going to adjust really slowly, and they're going to adjust over a massive amount of time. So it kind of just allows me to pick up all these little free cheapy pots and not really have to worry about too much. So I'm always saying, okay, can I call here to sometimes hit a flop really hard and get paid occasionally? And also, if I'm going to cold call with a hand like a suited connector, thinking about flops. What kind of flops am I hitting on with a hand like 9-8? Well, I'm hitting on 5, 6, 7. I'm catching on 10, 9, 10, 9, 10 jack queen. Catching on like really connected boards. I'm catching on 3 spade boards. I'm catching on boards with 2 spades on the flop and turn it, and all of a sudden the flush draw completes and people panic. So think about that as well. Always be thinking about, what are you hitting on? How does that relate to your opponent? Is your opponent going to make mistakes on those kind of flops? If yes, okay, cool, awesome. All of a sudden there's some extra implied odds. If not, is it really worthwhile calling strictly for implied odds? Because when I call preflop, I always have some idea on why I'm cold calling. Either I'm calling for implied odds, or I'm calling for some implied odds with a lot of ways that I can make money when he plays predictably post-flop, or I know I can peel a lot of flops, or I know I can float a lot of flops, or whatever it be. So these are the little things I want to be thinking about, as well as thinking about pre-flop actions. Do I expect, if I call here, that I'm going to get 3-bet? Do I expect if I flat here that it's going to create a multi-way pot? If it does, is that good, is that bad? It's very simple. It's just a nice mental checklist and framework to think about. Okay, if I make X action, what do I expect to happen? And if for some odd reason I didn't think I could flat here profitably, then I would say, okay, can I 3-bet it profitably? If no, fold. Literally that simple. It's just my brain kind of makes all these little if-then statements, and all these if-then statements are created off of running all the off-session EVs, analysis, and math. So again, just some extra things you want to be thinking about. So if I end up calling here with intentions of thinking I'm going to be messing around a fair chunk of the time post, probably going to be doing just that. It doesn't mean I'm going to float every single flop, because you can't. I still have to look at texture. I still have to say, okay, how does that relate to his range? And if I know that this guy's the predictable c-bet with his entire range, check fold a lot of flops, then I'm totally fine going for a line like this and just stabbing and trying to pick up. But again, I was already thinking about that from pre-flop before I even called. And that's why when I called, I said, okay, my thought process is that I'm going to be able to pick this up post sometimes, just kind of fight for it and win some free pots. That can be a really profitable endeavor for me. Again, some extra things we want to be thinking about. So let's start talking about everyone's favorite topic in the world, which is 3-betting. And I do a lot of pre-flop thinking about 3-betting and thinking in general on 3-betting. And I think it's important that you guys do as well. So I'm going to say a couple of different things about 3-betting right off the bat. First is that remember that 3-betting, 4-betting, 5-betting, 6-betting, 7-betting, 8-betting, whatever, are not usually the most necessary skill sets at the smallest levels. Simple as that. Most of the time, just if you 3-bet for value in the smallest of games, you're going to perform better. The reason why I say that is because the average person does not fold versus a 3-bet enough of the time at the smaller games to really do a tremendous amount of bluff 3-betting. Okay, so as a default, if you 3-bet for value in the smaller games and just kind of kept it to that, took some really great bluff 3-bets occasionally, but just really mostly stuck to value, most people would perform a lot better. Okay, so there's my disclaimer, my safety statement. So let's get into the actual fun stuff. So when I'm talking about 3-betting, I am usually 3-betting as a bluff for one of two reasons. I'm doing it because it's outright profitable, or I'm doing it because it's going to be profitable later. Notice that I'm always focused on profitable. I'm not just throwing in bluff 3-bets for the heck of doing it. I'm not just doing it to get some 3-bet or re-steal number quote-unquote high enough or look cool for the cool kids, because I don't care about that. I care about profit and money. So I'm focused on that. That is my main focus. No matter what I'm doing, 3-betting especially, but no matter what I'm doing, it's monetarily focused, because that's what I care about, and I can prove that, and I can use math to prove that. So if I'm looking at something like outright profitable 3-betting, it just means that I expect to 3-bet and expect to show enough profit with that 3-bet right now, aka generate enough folds to make my life easy, profitable. If I get 4-bet or flatted, which I don't expect to happen a tremendous amount, I can always just try to actualize my equity, fold if I get 4-bet. That can be an outright profitable 3-bet. Perfect, fine, no problems. And you just simply compare your 3-bet size to how often you expect your opponent to fold, run some very simple EV math on that, and you have a very crystal clear idea. That simple, no problems. We can do all that work in off-session analysis, so it's easy and ready to go as soon as we get on the tables. So that's outright profitable 3-betting. The other one is show profit later 3-betting, and that usually means that we are not going to generate enough folds now to show outright profit, but we expect to be able to show enough profit later, either by 5-betting when they 4-bet, or by c-betting if they call our 3-bets and expecting that to show enough profit, that sort of stuff. So obviously, outright profitability or outright profitable 3-betting is usually going to be easier. It's going to be less costly because you know you don't have to throw in that second piece of the barrel or anything because you know you're generating enough folds pre-flop. And usually if I were kind of building a timeline of what I'm focused on, my initial focus would always be on value 3-betting. My next focus would be on outright profitable 3-betting. And then after all that is completely hammered and glossed and clean, then I'm going to start focusing on 3-betting that is profitable later. So we're going to focus mostly on all three, or really just focusing on outright and profitable later now because it's not too difficult to figure out value 3-betting. It's usually a pretty simple thing to figure out. So let's do an example so you know what the heck I'm talking about in case I have you a little confused at this point. So take a spot where MP1 opens, we have Jack 9. I don't think anyone is going to argue with me that Jack 9 is way more of a 3-bet for bluff or semi-bluff or something like that. Certainly not a 3-bet for foul. So if I'm just doing a quick mental checklist, what I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, can I flat call this? And if I say no, then I say, okay, can I 3-bet this? If I can't 3-bet it, then I fold it. That simple. So let's just assume that we can't flat this. Flatting is not profitable for this situation, so we have to 3-bet or fold it. Okay, well, if I'm thinking about 3-betting, I say, okay, if I 3-bet, do I expect the people behind me to flat call? Do I expect the button, the small blind, or the big blind to flat? If yes, is that really a good situation? Probably not, because they're fishy. All of a sudden I'm in a bloated pot with Jack high against the fish. I don't know about you, but I'm not super excited about that. So next I look at MP1 and say, okay, if I 3-bet you, do I expect you to flat it a lot, fold it a lot, or 4-bet me a lot? I really don't want to handle a lot of 4-bets because then it's getting ultra pricey and I've just blown up somewhere between 9 to 12 big blinds, and that's not really fantastic. If I expect my opponent to flat and fold a lot to c-bets, okay, that can be profitable. If I expect my opponent to fold a massive amount of the time, then I'm getting really excited because then we can start talking about an outright profitable 3-bet where all I have to really do is expose my 3-bet and expect to show pretty much snap profit. That's fantastic. So what I do is I start saying, okay, at what size do I need to go here to get the job done? And say I decide 10 was that number. So what I do is I say, okay, I'm risking at this point $10 to win $4.50, and thus my 3-bet needs to work at least 69% of the time to break even. So if it works more than 69% of the time, I'm showing snap or outright profit. If it doesn't, I'm not. I'm just taking an outright loss. And an outright loss doesn't necessarily mean the play itself is going to be a loss. Again, thinking about that profitable later 3-bet. So in this situation, if I thought my opponent were going to fold 75, 78% of the time pre-flop, I am showing a pretty good amount of profit here just by going for a 3-ball. And if I expect him to fold too much and the people behind to fold a tremendous amount of the time as well, this can be a really excellent situation. And this is something that I'm always looking for. Nice, cheap, easy, outright profitable 3-bets where I don't have to expose a lot of money. I know it's going to show profit right away. And if something goes awry, it's easy. Just shut it down. If you 3-bet your opponent calls and you thought it was an outright profitable 3-bet and you whiff the flop, which you're going to do a tremendous amount of the time, why c-bet? You were 3-betting because you thought he was folding too much, which means if he calls that he's strong, which means do you think you're getting any folds on that low flop? I'll give you a hint, no. So if that be the case, your 3-bet was good. don't destroy it by throwing out a crappy c-bet. You, again, think of this is why you really have to have that clear, decisive idea pre-flop of what am I doing, why am I doing it. If I'm doing something for outright profit, don't kill it by throwing out some janky c-bet that all of a sudden turns the entire play negative EV. So it's kind of something that bothers me. I see a lot of people do it and they destroy a lot of money, especially because that c-bet and that 3-bet pot's really expensive. So again, focus on the outright profitable 3-bets. Understand that if it goes awry, just try to actualize any equity and go forward from there. And always look for nice, easy, outright profitable 3-bets because they're there for sure. And it's pretty easy to see in people's stats. I mean, a really high fold versus 3-bet percentage, and I'm just going to town. So again, some things I want to think about, as well as who's behind me, thinking about can I get enough folds from them as well, because I don't want to take an outright profitable 3-bet that's outright profitable against MP1, but the small blind's going to call me 80% of the time. That's probably not something that I want to be doing much of. Okay, so let's take another situation, and let's say the cutoff is the kind of guy who's only going to fold versus our 3-bet 60% of the time here. Well, it's pretty easy to figure out that 60% is, it's not going to be an outright profitable 3-bet. Our opponent's not going to fold enough of the time. We can't go that small and expect to generate enough folds. And you can use bet sizing in your favor in this situation. I mean, if it's a situation where you can risk one big blind more and generate an extra 10% folds or something, all of a sudden I might go the little bit extra if I'm bluffing and I think I can get it done. But usually it's one of those where you can't go too much smaller, because if you go too much smaller, especially out of position, all of a sudden they're going to call like 100% of the time. And that might not be something that you want to have happen. So, especially when you're bluffing. So, in this situation, say we decide to 3-bet and we don't think we're getting enough folds now, but we think that we can get a lot of folds later. We think that he's going to play pretty fit or fold against our c-bets. He's probably going to be folding 70% of the time there or something like that. All of a sudden, this can become one of those situations where we can just 3-bet it, c-bet it, and expect to win a fair chunk of the time. Again, doesn't mean I'm going to win it every single time, no, but looking at the general EV, I thought it was profitable, and thus I went for it. So these are situations that you can also look for. Now, there's a lot of these situations, and cool, but again, you have to risk so much extra money here, and you have to be so sharp. You have to know exactly what to look for. You have to know what textures are good, what textures are bad, how your opponent tends to adjust, because the second you can go post-flop, and the second you're going post-flop, especially out of position, things can get hairy in a hurry, and it can be really difficult to show enough profit in those situations. So it's important that you're thinking about that as well, not just mindlessly 3-betting and expecting to be able to pick it up with every c-bet, but really looking at the situation, looking at your opponent. And this is why I say this is like not the 3-bet I'm excited about. I don't mind taking them if it's excellent, but most of the time I'm way more focused on outright profitable 3-bets, attacking people who fold too much versus 3-balls. That is where I'm going to show profit. That's where my money comes from. It doesn't come from making these really massive situations that are thin at best and possibly very negative EV, assuming that I missed something or miscalculated something. So again, I'd veer away from doing a lot of this. I'm not saying that situations aren't there that are good, but this would be when I'm very, very comfortable. I know exactly what to look for. That would be when I'd consider looking for these. Otherwise, like I said, stick to either pure value 3-bets or look for some outright profitable 3-bets, because those are easier, you're exposing less, and I usually think they're more profitable for most people. And the last situation I wanted to look up, which I think is relatively important as well, is one where the button opens and I'm deciding to go for a 3-bet or not, because I don't think I can flat it, so I either have to 3-bet or fold it. That simple. So in this situation, I am asking myself, can I 3-bet and show profit? If I 3-bet, do I expect the big blind to flat it, 4-bet me, or fold a ton? Most people are going to fold a ton. And how do I expect the button to react? If I expect the button to fold a ton pre-flop, yeah, I'm just going to 3-bet, show the outright profitable profit, and go from there. That's awesome. If I expect him to 4-bet a lot, is that necessarily a bad thing? Well, if he's 4-betting so wide that I can go for 5-bet ships, that can be excellent, and that's something that I am always looking for. Again, this is something that doesn't come up a tremendous amount of the time, and in fact, I probably maybe only do this once every couple of sessions, probably about 2 sessions. So, once every couple thousand hands. And it's just a situation that comes up, but you don't have to go for it every single time. It's not going to be there every single time. And you need some serious information before you just start shipping entire stacks in. Now, the hand type I love. I love using an ace because I'm never that bad equity-wise. I love a suited ace especially because I have more equity, and I love a suited ace with a card that can catch a straight. Even more equity. Fantastic. So these are the little things that I'm thinking about. But again, I'm thinking about what do I expect my opponent to do if I 3-bet? How does that relate to my profitability? Is that going to be a good or a bad situation? If I expect him to 4-bet too much and fold versus a lot of 5s, okay, fine, I'll go for that. If I expected him to 4-bet stack a range with things like ace-queen and 10s and stuff like that in it, I might not be as excited about this because, that can make up a large percentage of his 4-bet range, and now more of his 4-bet range is going to stack, and all of it's going to beat me. So these are things you want to be thinking about, and again, I don't think this is the most important hand in the entire world. It can be profitable, can look cool, whatever, but past that, unless you know it's going to be plus EV, I wouldn't waste too much time looking for spots like this. Again, I'd focus more on the value 3-bets and the outright profitable 3-bets rather than, again, situations where I have to expose my entire stack for something that might only be, a handful of big blinds of profit. So that's going to wrap up for this vid. Again, I'm hoping this is getting you guys thinking about, the mental checklist I'm building when I'm thinking about things both on and off the table. And do a lot of this work off the table. Make it so it's automatic when you're playing. And also, this will help you start seeing holes in other people's strategies, other regs, and just the player pool at large, and just help you have a better conceptual strategic understanding. And that's really all you can ask for, because once you have that, you can just build whatever the heck you want. You can choose better ranges because you're going to understand what's good and what's bad. You're going to understand default ranges and adjusted ranges in each part of the spectrum. And again, if you put the time and effort into it, it's definitely going to benefit you. Even if you only take a couple of things from this, it can benefit you. But the more thinking you do, the more planning you do, the more steps ahead you're thinking, assuming that you're not thinking too far ahead. You don't want to be on the river when you're pre-flop, but usually I'm on the flop when I'm pre-flop, and I'm on the river when I'm on the flop. So I'm almost always thinking like a full street or two ahead. But I don't want to be thinking too far ahead and, God forbid, miss something that was pretty big on this street. So again, hopefully that helps. Hopefully that gets your brain jogging away, which is what we really want. And same as always, if you have any questions, let me know down below. Otherwise, best of luck, happy grinding, and good luck with the planning.